At my daughter's anniversary dinner, my son lifted his wine glass and smiled at the room. To family, Ethan said, even the ones who show up dressed like they've given up. A few people laughed. My granddaughter did not. Then Bradley slid a folder beside my plate. Sign it, Catherine. At least you can still do something useful for us. When I refused, Ethan leaned closer. You're broke, Mom. Stop acting like your opinion matters. The doorbell rang. Ethan straightened his jacket, expecting a business partner. But the man who entered walked straight past him, stopped beside me and said, Mrs. Jordan, the board cannot complete the $28 million transaction without your approval. No one laughed after that. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe if you believe respect should never depend on money. Tell me what you would have said to Ethan and share where you're watching from and what time it is there. Before that night, my children believed they understood exactly what had happened to me. They thought grief had made me small. They thought medical bills had stripped away everything Thomas and I had built. They thought the woman who once managed a household, balanced accounts, raised 2 children, and helped her husband keep a workshop running had become confused and dependent. They were wrong, but I understood why they believed it. When Thomas became ill, our life narrowed one appointment at a time. At first, it was only fatigue. Then came the tests, the specialists, the winter drives across Columbus, and the silence after each new diagnosis. Soon, our calendar belonged to hospitals, pharmacies, home care nurses, and insurance offices that kept me on hold while Thomas slept nearby. We had always lived carefully. Thomas repaired what other people threw away. I kept every receipt and knew what we spent each month. We had savings, but illness can turn years of discipline into numbers on a statement. Insurance covered much of the treatment, but not everything. There were medications, medical equipment, and changes to the house because Thomas could no longer climb the stairs safely. I hired help only when I had no other choice. Most days, I cared for him myself. I do not regret a single dollar. Thomas had spent 43 years caring for me in quiet ways. He warmed my car on freezing mornings. He repaired my mother's old dining table because I could not bear to replace it. He never let me carry the heavier grocery bags even after his back began to ache. When he needed me, I was there. After he died, the house felt too large and too silent. His work boots remained by the basement door for 3 weeks because moving them felt like admitting he would never return. Then the final bills arrived. I sold the house 6 months later. Ethan called it a financial collapse. Allison described it as a sad necessity. Neither understood that I made the decision before any bank forced me to. I wanted every medical bill paid and every obligation settled. After the mortgage, medical expenses, taxes, and closing costs, the money left was not enough to support the kind of life my children considered respectable. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of Columbus. It was clean, quiet, and close to a bus line. The kitchen was narrow, the bedroom window faced maple trees, and the woman downstairs played gospel music every Sunday morning. I liked it more than I admitted. My children saw only what I had lost. The first time Ethan visited, he looked around as though someone had made a mistake. "You can't stay here forever," he said. "I signed a 12-month lease. That's not what I mean." I knew exactly what he meant. The apartment did not match the version of his mother he wanted others to see. Allison was gentler, but her pity hurt differently. She brought decorative pillows I did not need and offered to replace dishes that had served me for 30 years. At first, they called often. They asked whether I needed groceries or help with rent. I appreciated the concern until I realized they were waiting for proof that I could no longer manage my own life. When I began using the bus, Ethan acted horrified. "You're 66, Mom. You shouldn't be standing at bus stops. I'm 66, not 6. He sighed as though I had missed the point. I used coupons because I had always used coupons. I compared prices because wasting money had never impressed me. I wore the same navy coat for 8 winters because it was warm and still had all its buttons. None of that embarrassed me. It embarrassed them. Ethan began explaining simple financial matters in a slow voice. He warned me about scams, then asked whether I still remembered the password to my own checking account. Allison stopped inviting me to some social events. She claimed they were crowded or too late, but Sophie once mentioned a charity luncheon I had never heard about. "Mom said you probably wouldn't be comfortable there," Sophie told me. I smiled and changed the subject. The truth was, Allison was afraid her friends would see me arrive by bus wearing Risoled shoes. Bradley was more direct. Whenever we spoke, he asked about Thomas's old workshop near the edge of the city. It was a low brick building with a metal roof and 3 work bays. Thomas had built cabinets there, restored furniture, and taught neighborhood boys how to use tools safely. After Thomas died, I kept it. Bradley called that sentimental. "You should sell before the area loses value," he told me. "It hasn't lost value. You don't understand the commercial market. I understand the tax bill I receive every year. He laughed as though I had made a charming old woman joke. Then 3 weeks before Allison's anniversary dinner, an envelope arrived from the Franklin County Recorder's Office. I opened it over breakfast, expecting another tax notice. Instead, the letter asked me to verify information connected to a proposed financial interest in the workshop. I read the sentence 3 times. The notice referenced a commercial guarantee application and requested confirmation that I had authorized the property to be considered as collateral. I had authorized nothing. My hands did not shake. I placed the letter on the table, took one slow breath, and read every line again. A younger version of me might have called Ethan immediately. A frightened version might have demanded an explanation from Allison. Instead, I called the county office. The clerk could not disclose the full application, but she confirmed enough to make my stomach tighten. Someone had submitted documents containing my legal name, the workshop address, and information that should not have been available outside the family. I wrote down the reference number and called my attorney, Samuel Price. He had handled the sale of my home and updated my estate documents after Thomas died. When I read him the notice, his voice changed. "Do not confront anyone yet," he said. "Send me a copy today." That afternoon, I took the bus downtown and delivered it myself. On the ride home, I thought about every recent conversation. Ethan asking whether the deed was entirely in my name. Bradley suggesting I sign over management authority. Allison avoiding my eyes whenever money came up. The questions no longer felt casual. That evening, Ethan called. He asked how I was feeling and whether I had considered simplifying my estate. I looked at the recorder's notice beside my lamp. "I'm managing just fine," I said. There was a pause. "I know, Mom. We're only trying to protect you." After we hung up, I stared at Thomas's photograph. For the first time, I wondered whether the people claiming to protect me were the very people I needed protection from. Allison called me 4 days after the notice from the recorder's office arrived. Her voice was unusually bright. "Mom, I wanted to make sure you're still coming Saturday. To your anniversary dinner." Of course. 20 years is a big milestone. I looked at the county letter lying beside my phone. "You already invited me 2 weeks ago." "I know. I just wanted to confirm." There was a carefulness in her voice that made every word feel rehearsed. "I'll be there," I said. She exhaled so softly that another person might not have noticed. Then she added, "Bradley thought it might be a good opportunity for all of us to talk. You know, as a family. Talk about what? Oh, nothing unpleasant. Just some practical things. We haven't all been together in a while." That was not true. We had eaten together at Ethan's house less than a month earlier, but I did not correct her. "Will Sophie be there?" "Of course." "Then I'll come." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the word practical. In my family, practical had recently become another way of saying something belonged to me but would be more useful in someone else's hands. The next morning, Ethan called. He rarely phoned before noon unless he wanted something. "Mom, quick question," he said. "The workshop is still completely in your name, right?" I let the silence stretch. "Why are you asking?" "I'm helping Allison and Bradley organize some long-term family planning. You're organizing their finances." "It's bigger than that. We're looking at ways to protect family assets. My workshop is not their asset." That isn't what I meant. It was exactly what he meant. He began speaking in the patient tone he used whenever he wanted me to feel unreasonable. "You know how these things go. If something happened to you, the property could get tied up in probate, taxes, legal fees, delays. We're trying to save everyone trouble. My estate is already organized." "By whom?" "An attorney." Which attorney? I glanced toward Thomas's photograph on the bookshelf. "That is not information you need." Ethan laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You're making this harder than it has to be. I didn't realize my private documents were creating difficulties for you." He changed direction immediately. "I'm only concerned about you. Have you updated your will since Dad died?" "Yes. And who has a copy?" "My attorney. Maybe I should keep one too." "No." Another silence followed. Then he said, "We'll talk Saturday." It did not sound like a suggestion. Before the dinner, I spent several evenings finishing a quilt I had started for Allison and Bradley. It was made from soft blue-gray and cream fabric colors that reminded me of the first house they had rented after their wedding. I had saved pieces from one of Allison's old cotton dresses and a shirt Bradley had worn when Sophie was born. They would not recognize every piece, but I did. Thomas used to say that a handmade gift carried time inside it. Every stitch represented minutes of someone's life willingly given away. By Saturday afternoon, the quilt was folded inside a white box and tied with a navy ribbon. I wore a dark green dress I had owned for nearly 10 years. It was clean, well-fitted, and perfectly suitable for dinner. The fabric had softened with age, but I had never believed newness and beauty were the same thing. I took the bus to Allison's neighborhood, then walked the final 3 blocks. Her house stood at the end of a curved street lined with young maple trees and carefully trimmed lawns. Warm light shone through tall front windows. Several expensive cars were already parked along the driveway. Before I reached the porch, the door opened. Sophie rushed outside without a coat. "Grandma." She wrapped both arms around me, nearly knocking the gift box from my hands. "You'll freeze," I said. "I saw you from the window." She took the box before I could protest and carried it inside. Allison appeared in the foyer wearing a silver dress and a strained smile. "You walked from the bus stop. It's only 3 blocks. You should have called. Someone could have picked you up." "I enjoyed the walk." Her eyes moved over my dress. The smile remained, but something behind it faded. "You look nice," she said. It sounded like an apology. Megan came down the stairs carrying a glass of champagne. She wore a fitted black dress and diamond earrings large enough to catch the light from across the room. She looked at my gift box. "What did you bring?" "A quilt." "A quilt?" she repeated. "For their anniversary." Megan tilted her head. "That's certainly personal." Sophie opened the box before anyone could stop her. The quilt unfolded across her arms, revealing the pattern I had spent weeks arranging. "Oh, Grandma, this is beautiful." Allison touched one of the blue squares. "Is this from my old summer dress?" "Yes." Her expression softened for one brief second. Then Bradley entered from the dining room. "Everyone's here," he announced. "We should get drinks before dinner." Allison quickly folded the quilt and placed it back in the box. "We'll put this somewhere safe." She carried it toward the hallway instead of displaying it with the other gifts arranged near the fireplace. Megan leaned closer to me. "Handmade gifts are smart when you're watching your budget." She said it lightly as though offering praise. I met her eyes. "Kindness is also inexpensive, Megan, but some people still find it difficult." Her smile tightened. Sophie covered a laugh with her hand. Bradley's home looked like a furniture showroom that evening. Candles burned along the mantel. White flowers stood in tall glass vases. Every surface had been polished until it reflected the room. Yet beneath the elegant music and expensive perfume, I could feel tension. Ethan greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, then immediately asked whether I had brought my identification. My identification. "In case we discuss any documents later." "I thought this was an anniversary dinner." "It is. We may also handle a few practical matters." There was that word again. Sophie slipped her hand into mine. "Come see the photos Mom put out." She led me toward a table covered with family pictures. I recognized Allison and Bradley's wedding day, Sophie's first birthday holidays at the house Thomas and I had sold. There were dozens of photographs. I appeared in only 3. As Sophie showed me the display, I heard Bradley and Ethan speaking in the nearby office. Their voices were low, but one sentence reached me clearly. "She needs to sign tonight." I did not turn my head. Sophie continued talking about a school project while I studied the reflection in a framed photograph. Through it, I could see Bradley standing beside his desk with a folder in his hand. When he noticed us nearby, he placed the folder beneath a stack of papers. A few minutes later, Allison asked Sophie to help in the kitchen. I remained near the office doorway. Bradley's desk was visible from the hall. The folder he had hidden was pale gray with a printed label along the edge. Catherine Elaine Jordan. My complete legal name. Below it were the words, "Property Guarantee, Preliminary Documents." My pulse remained steady, but the room seemed suddenly colder. I did not enter the office. I did not touch the folder. Samuel had warned me not to reveal what I knew until we understood the full plan. Instead, I memorized everything I could see: the lender's logo, the document title, and a handwritten note attached to the front. Obtain signature before Monday. Behind me, Ethan spoke. "Looking for something, Mom?" I turned slowly. He stood at the end of the hallway holding 2 glasses of wine. "Just admiring the house." His gaze moved from my face to the office. Then he smiled and offered me one of the glasses. "You should relax tonight." I accepted it without drinking. I'm perfectly relaxed. He studied me for another second as though trying to decide whether I had seen too much. From the dining room, Bradley called everyone to the table. Ethan placed his hand lightly against my back and guided me forward. As we entered the room, I saw a place card at the far end of the table. My name was written on it. Beside my plate lay a silver pen. The silver pen beside my plate was positioned too carefully to be accidental. I sat at the far end of the dining table while Ethan took the seat nearest Bradley. Allison sat between them, looking from one man to the other, as if she had already been asked to choose a side. Sophie sat beside me. She noticed the pen, too. "Why is that there?" she whispered. "I suppose we'll find out." The table had been set with white china crystal glasses and gold-edged napkins. Candles reflected in the polished silverware. It looked beautiful enough for a magazine, but I had never felt less welcome in my daughter's home. Bradley stood and raised his glass. "To 20 years of marriage," he said. "And to the people who helped us build this life." Everyone lifted a glass. I thought of the years Thomas and I had watched Sophie when Allison worked late. I remembered lending Allison the down payment for her first car and helping Bradley repair their first kitchen after a pipe burst. No one mentioned those things. Dinner began with roasted salmon asparagus and a bottle of wine Bradley described in great detail. The conversation moved quickly toward vacations, property values, and business opportunities. Megan spoke about a resort in Scottsdale where she and Ethan planned to spend a week in the spring. "The spa alone costs more than some people spend on rent," she said, laughing. Her eyes flicked toward me. I took a sip of water. Ethan described a new watch he wanted. Bradley discussed plans to remodel the basement into a wine room. Allison talked about replacing the countertops even though the ones she had were barely 5 years old. Every story seemed designed to prove that they had more than someone else. Eventually, Megan turned toward me. "How is the apartment, Catherine? It's comfortable. Still taking the bus?" "Yes." She gave a sympathetic little smile. "That must be difficult in winter." "Not especially. You know," she continued, "Ethan and I would be happy to help if your electric bill is becoming a problem. Older buildings can be terribly inefficient. My electric bill is paid." "I only asked because Ethan said you've been watching every penny." Ethan looked down at his plate. "I said Mom is careful." "No," Megan replied lightly. "You said she stood in the grocery aisle for 10 minutes comparing canned soup?" Bradley laughed. Ethan smiled as if the memory were charming. "It was 20 cents, Mom. 20 cents per can. You bought 4 cans. That made it 80 cents. The table laughed again. Sophie did not. I looked at Ethan. "You learned multiplication. I'm glad something useful came from the experience." Sophie lowered her face to hide a smile. Megan's mouth tightened. Bradley leaned back in his chair. "Catherine has always been cautious. Thomas used to say she could stretch $1 until George Washington begged for mercy." Thomas had never said that. He had respected the way I handled money. He knew that every careful choice had helped us pay the mortgage, educate our children, and survive years when his business was slow. I could have corrected Bradley. Instead, I watched Allison. She was pushing a piece of salmon around her plate. "Can we talk about something else?" she said quietly. It was not a defense. It was a request to make the discomfort disappear. Bradley ignored her. "I still think you should consider senior housing," he said to me. "There are some nice subsidized communities outside the city." "I'm not looking for a new home. You may not be looking now, but it's better to plan before you have no choice." "I have choices." Ethan sighed. "Mom, nobody is attacking you. That is usually what people say while doing it." Silence settled over the table for a few seconds. Then Megan smiled brightly and asked Bradley about his company. He welcomed the change. "We're close to securing financing for the Riverside development," he said. "Once that closes, everything changes." Allison looked up sharply. "I thought the financing was still uncertain." "It's being handled." "By Monday?" Ethan asked. Bradley nodded. Their eyes met for less than a second, but I saw it. Megan lifted her glass. "And Ethan has his own big announcement." Ethan pretended to look modest. "It isn't official yet." "What isn't official?" Sophie asked. "A regional distribution partnership," he said. "Medical equipment. Hospitals, private clinics, long-term care facilities." "With which company?" I asked. Ethan turned toward me. "Whitmore Medical Technologies." I kept my expression neutral. Megan beamed. "It's one of the fastest-growing medical technology companies in the country." "I know the company," I said. Ethan smiled. "You may have seen the name on television." "Perhaps." Bradley leaned forward. "This is not a small opportunity, Catherine. If the agreement goes through, Ethan could control distribution across several Midwestern states." "Control," I repeated. "Manage," Ethan corrected. "The point is, it could change the future of this family." There was something rehearsed in the way he said it. "How far along is the proposal?" I asked. Ethan wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Far enough. That wasn't my question." He gave a strained laugh. "I didn't realize this was an interview." "Did Richard Whitmore personally approve the partnership?" The room became very still. Ethan's fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass. "Why would the CEO personally approve a regional agreement?" "Because proposals involving private guarantees and significant property collateral usually receive additional review." Bradley's fork touched his plate with a small metallic sound. Megan looked between us. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You seem unusually interested." I asked a simple question. And I answered it. "People at my level don't need to speak directly with the CEO." "What level is that?" Sophie coughed into her napkin. Allison gave her a warning look. Ethan's cheeks reddened. "You wouldn't understand how corporate negotiations work." "Then explain them to me." Bradley stepped in quickly. "The important thing is that Ethan has the right relationships." "With whom?" "Senior people." "Names." Ethan placed his glass down harder than necessary. This is exactly what I mean. You turn every conversation into an argument because you can't stand seeing your children succeed. I looked at him carefully. Success has never frightened me. Dishonesty does. Allison whispered, "Mom, please." I turned toward her. "Please what?" She looked away. The answer was clear. She wanted me to stop asking questions so the evening could continue without forcing her to face what was happening. Megan reached for her wine. "I think Catherine is simply overwhelmed. Financial conversations can be stressful when someone is living on a fixed income." There it was, again the gentle voice, the carefully chosen cruelty. I set down my fork. "My income has nothing to do with whether Ethan's story is true." Ethan laughed. "You think I'm lying because you can't imagine anyone trusting me with something important?" "No. I think you're avoiding direct questions." Bradley pushed back his chair. "That's enough." He stood and walked toward the hallway. Allison's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. Sophie slipped her fingers into mine beneath the table. Ethan leaned closer. "You should be proud of us, Mom." "I would be proud of honesty." His expression hardened. A minute later, Bradley returned carrying the pale gray folder I had seen in his office. My full legal name was visible along its edge. He placed it on the table between us, then moved the silver pen closer to my hand. "This," he said, "is what we actually need to discuss tonight." No one looked surprised except Sophie. That told me everything. Bradley opened the folder and turned it toward me. Several yellow tabs marked the places where I was expected to sign. "Before you react," he said, "this is only a temporary guarantee." I looked at the first page but did not touch the pen. "A guarantee for what, the Riverside development?" Bradley replied. "My company has secured the project, but the lender needs additional collateral before releasing the final construction funds." Allison spoke quickly. "It's a strong project, Mom. The city has already approved most of it." "Most of it?" "The important approvals," Bradley said. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "This benefits more than Bradley's company. Once his financing is cleared, part of the capital can support the regional distribution operation." I looked from him to Bradley. "You plan to use construction financing to support Ethan's medical equipment business." "That's an oversimplification," Ethan said. "Then simplify it correctly." Bradley tapped the papers with one finger. "The companies would remain separate. There are legal ways to structure temporary capital movement. Does the lender know about that plan?" His expression changed for only a second. "That is not relevant to your role." "My role appears to involve signing my name." "Exactly," Ethan said. "Nothing more." Sophie shifted in her chair. Allison reached across the table and closed her hand around her daughter's wrist. "Why don't you help me clear the dessert plates? I want to stay." "Sophie!" The warning in Allison's voice was sharper this time. I looked at my granddaughter. "It's all right," I told her. "Go help your mother." She did not want to leave, but she slowly followed Allison into the kitchen. Megan remained at the table, watching me with an expression that was almost curious. She seemed less interested in the legality of the documents than in whether I could be made to obey. Bradley turned to the second page. "The workshop property is currently unused." "It is not unused. You don't operate a business there. That does not make it available to you." "No one is taking it," he said. "The lender only needs it listed as security. The Riverside project will begin producing revenue long before there is any risk. Then, use your own house." Allison stopped in the doorway behind him. Bradley's jaw tightened. "Our house is already connected to other financing." "So is the company." He ignored the question. Ethan pointed to the marked signature line. "Mom, the workshop is sitting there collecting dust. Dad would have wanted it to help the family." I felt something inside me go still. Thomas's workshop had never collected dust while he was alive. Even after his illness forced him to stop taking customers, he went there whenever his strength allowed. Sometimes he simply sat at his workbench and ran his hand over the wood. Ethan knew that. "Do not use your father to pressure me," I said. "I'm not pressuring you. You brought legal papers to an anniversary dinner and placed a pen beside my plate." Megan gave a soft laugh. "You're making it sound sinister." I turned toward her. People who have nothing to hide usually do not need to explain that something is not sinister. She looked away. I began reading the first page carefully. Bradley sighed. "You don't need to go through every paragraph tonight." "Yes, I do. The attorney has already reviewed it." "Whose attorney? The company's? Then that attorney represents you?" "Not me." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "This is what happens every time we try to help. You become suspicious. I become suspicious when people ask for my signature without wanting me to read what I'm signing." The agreement was more complicated than Bradley had suggested. It did not merely place the workshop behind a single construction loan. The language connected me personally to several existing and future obligations. I turned another page. The guarantee had no clear upper limit. It covered the principal, loan, interest, legal expenses, collection costs, penalties, and any additional borrowing approved under the same commercial relationship. "This is not temporary," I said. Bradley immediately answered, "It will be released when the project reaches the next phase. That is not written here. It is understood. If it is understood, it can be written." His face reddened. I continued reading. Then I found the clause that explained why they needed me so urgently. The agreement allowed the lender to pursue not only the workshop, but any present or future assets belonging to the guarantor. My future assets. I looked at Ethan. He was watching me too closely. "What future assets do you expect me to have?" His eyes moved toward Bradley. Bradley answered first. It is standard language. That was not my question. Allison returned to the table without Sophie. "Mom, please don't turn this into a fight. I did not bring these documents. No one is trying to hurt you." "Then why am I being asked to accept unlimited liability?" "It isn't unlimited," Bradley insisted. I pointed to the paragraph. "Read it aloud." He did not. I turned to another page and saw the value they had assigned to the workshop. It was far higher than the amount Bradley had ever mentioned when encouraging me to sell it. "You told me this property was losing value." "I said it might lose value." "You listed it here at nearly $1 million. That is the commercial estimate. And you thought I would sign it away without noticing you are not signing it away." Ethan pushed his chair back. "For God's sake, Mom, nobody is stealing anything. We need a guarantee, not a lecture." I closed the folder halfway. "Has my name already been used on another application?" The silence that followed was immediate. Bradley recovered first. "Of course not." He answered too quickly. Ethan looked at him. It was a small glance, but it carried a full conversation. I opened the folder again. "Has any document already been submitted using my name, my property information, or a copy of my signature?" "No," Bradley said. "Then why did the county contact me about a proposed financial interest in the workshop?" Allison's face lost its color. Megan slowly lowered her wineglass. Ethan turned toward Bradley. "You said that notice wouldn't be sent until after he stopped." No one moved. "Until after what I asked." Ethan's mouth tightened. Bradley reached for the folder. "This is getting out of control." I placed my hand on it before he could pull it away. "No, it is finally becoming clear." Allison moved closer to me. "Mom, listen. Bradley's company has had a difficult year. One major client delayed payment and another project went over budget. If this financing does not close, we could lose the house." There were tears in her eyes. For one painful second, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then I remembered that she had watched Bradley place the folder before me and had said nothing. "Did you know they planned to use the workshop?" She hesitated. "I knew it might be part of the guarantee." "Did you know they had already submitted information in my name? I didn't know the details." "That is not an answer." "Mom, we are family." The words landed harder than Ethan's insults. Family. As though the word itself erased consent. As though motherhood meant my signature belonged to them. Bradley lowered his voice. "Sign tonight, and this can all be resolved. The lender receives confirmation Monday. The Riverside funds are released. Ethan's proposal moves forward, and no one loses anything. And if I refuse..." Allison began crying. Bradley looked away. Ethan did not. "If you refuse, he said you destroy 2 businesses and put your daughter's home at risk over a building you barely use. I did not create your debts. You have the ability to fix them, with property that belongs to me. You don't need it." There was no hesitation in his voice. I stared at the man I had raised. He truly believed need-determined ownership and that he had the right to decide what I needed. I pushed the silver pen away. "No." Bradley's expression hardened. "This is not the time to be emotional. My answer is not emotional." Ethan stood so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. "You would rather watch your own children fail than sign one piece of paper. I would rather understand why my name has already appeared on documents I never approved." "You always do this," he snapped. "You act morally superior because you have nothing else." Ethan Allison whispered. He ignored her. "You're broke, Mom. You live in a tiny apartment, ride the bus, and count pennies at the grocery store. Yet you sit there pretending you're the only intelligent person in the room." Megan said nothing now. Bradley stared at the folder. Ethan leaned closer, his face tight with anger. "You should be grateful we still include you. You have no money, no influence, and nothing useful to offer except one signature." The words cut deeply, but I did not look away. I said no. His expression changed from anger to contempt. "You're not just broke," he said. "You're selfish, stubborn, and useless." The doorbell rang. The sound carried through the entire house. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ethan straightened his jacket and glanced at the clock. His anger disappeared beneath a confident smile. That must be the business contact I invited. He looked down at me as though the next few minutes would prove everything he had said. You may want to pay attention, Mom. This is what real success looks like. He walked toward the front door. I kept my hand on the folder because I already knew who was waiting on the other side. Before Ethan opened that door, there was something my family did not know. They did not know that Richard Whitmore had once sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he was too nervous to drink. They did not know that his company had begun with a cardboard box full of sketches, a broken prototype, and a young man who was close to giving up. And they certainly did not know that my name had been connected to Whitmore Medical Technologies long before Ethan had ever heard of it. I first met Margaret Whitmore 27 years earlier. She was volunteering at St. Anne's Community Hospital in Columbus, where I helped twice a week at the Family Information Desk. Margaret had silver-streaked hair, a warm laugh, and a habit of carrying peppermint candies in every coat pocket she owned. We became friends because we were both the kind of women who noticed when someone was frightened. Margaret would sit beside worried spouses in waiting rooms. I helped people call relatives or find a quiet place to cry. Neither of us had medical training, but we understood that kindness could sometimes make a difficult room feel less cold. Over time, our friendship extended beyond the hospital. We met for coffee, exchanged recipes, and visited each other's homes. Thomas repaired a damaged cabinet in Margaret's kitchen without charging her. She repaid him by bringing us enough peach preserves to last an entire winter. Her only child, Richard, was in his early 30s then. He had studied biomedical engineering and spent several years working for a large equipment manufacturer. He was intelligent, serious, and uncomfortable discussing himself. When Margaret spoke about him, her face changed. She was proud of him, but she was also worried. Richard had designed a compact patient monitoring system intended for small hospitals and rural clinics. At that time, many advanced monitoring systems were too expensive for facilities outside major cities. Richard believed he could produce a simpler device that tracked essential information without the cost and complexity of the larger machines. The idea was practical. The need was real. But the people with money were not interested. Banks considered him too risky. Established manufacturers did not want a cheaper product competing with their existing systems. Several investors told him rural hospitals did not represent a large enough market. One evening, Margaret arrived at my house carrying a folder. Thomas was in the kitchen repairing the handle on one of my old drawers. Richard stood behind his mother looking embarrassed. "Tell them," Margaret said. "Mom, tell them what happened." Richard sat at our table and explained that another lender had rejected his application. His savings were nearly gone. He could no longer afford the small workshop where he assembled his prototypes. "I may have to stop," he said. Thomas asked him 3 questions. How much does the device cost to make? How much could a hospital afford to pay? And does it work? Richard answered each one carefully. Then Thomas asked to see it. The following Saturday, Richard brought the prototype to Thomas's workshop. It was not impressive to look at. The casing was plain, the screen was small, and several internal components had been fitted by hand. But Richard explained every function with the focus of someone who had thought about nothing else for years. Thomas tested the housing, inspected the wiring, and asked whether the parts could be replaced easily. I asked about the hospitals Richard hoped to serve. He showed us letters from clinic administrators, nurses, and doctors who believed the device could help them monitor more patients with fewer resources. That mattered to me more than the polished business proposal. Thomas and I did not make decisions quickly. We took the documents to an accountant. We spoke with a lawyer. We reviewed our savings and the inheritance I had received after my aunt died. The money was not enough to make us wealthy, but it was enough to give us choices. Richard needed $32,000 to continue. That was almost the entire inheritance. I remember sitting with Thomas in our bedroom after midnight, the figures spread across the bed. "We could lose all of it," I said. "Yes. You still think we should do it?" Thomas looked at the letters from the rural hospitals. "I think he built something useful. And I think useful work deserves a chance." We invested the money. Not as a gift, not as a loan between friends. We insisted on a formal agreement because Thomas believed respect required clarity. In return, I received a founding ownership stake in the new company. Margaret cried when we signed the papers. Richard did not cry, but he stood in our kitchen for a long time before speaking. "I won't waste this," he said. I know I told him. For the first few years, there was little evidence that our decision had been wise. The company struggled. Richard worked from a rented industrial space and drove across Ohio demonstrating the device to hospitals. Thomas helped redesign some of the outer casing so repairs could be completed more easily. I handled correspondence when Richard could not afford office staff. I reviewed invoices, organized early investor documents, and reminded him to eat when he worked through the night. Then one hospital placed a large order. Another followed. A regional health network adopted the system for several rural facilities. Richard hired engineers, then sales staff, then compliance specialists. The company expanded into additional equipment and software. Over the years, it grew far beyond the first device we had seen on Thomas's workbench. Richard never forgot where it began. He offered to buy my shares several times as the company increased in value. I always declined. Thomas and I received small distributions when the board approved them, but most of the value remained tied to the company. The shares were private restricted and not something I could sell as easily as a public stock. When Thomas became ill, I considered asking Richard to arrange a sale, but the company was preparing for a major expansion and the legal restrictions made a quick transaction difficult. More importantly, Thomas asked me not to make a frightened decision. "You still believe in the company?" he asked from his hospital bed. "Yes." "Then don't sell something valuable just because life has become painful." So I did not. After Thomas died, I continued living from the money I could access. I sold the house, paid the bills, and reduced my expenses. I never told Ethan or Allison the value of the shares, partly because I was bound by confidentiality agreements. Whitmore Medical Technologies had entered negotiations involving a major acquisition, and shareholders with inside information were prohibited from discussing the potential transaction. But that was not the only reason. I had grown uncomfortable with the way my children talked about money. Ethan measured people by what they could provide. Allison feared losing appearances more than losing peace. I wanted them to believe I was still worthy of respect without the promise of inheritance. I did not deliberately test them. Life did that on its own. They saw my small apartment, my old coat, and my bus pass. They assumed they had seen the whole truth. They never asked whether I was content. They never asked what I had protected. They only asked what I could give them. 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, Richard called me personally. The board had accepted a preliminary acquisition offer. If the transaction closed, my shares would be worth more money than Thomas and I had ever imagined. Richard explained that the final approval process would take time and that every major shareholder would need to sign. Then his legal department found something else. An application connected to Ethan Jordan, my son. The application listed me as a guarantor. It referenced my workshop. And it contained a signature that was supposed to be mine. Richard asked whether I had authorized it. "No," I said. After that call, we agreed to remain quiet until the evidence was secured. So when Ethan called me, I said nothing. When Bradley pushed the folder toward me, I refused to sign. And when the doorbell rang, I already knew the man standing outside had not come to impress my son. He had come because 27 years earlier, Thomas and I had believed in him when no one else did. Now, Richard Whitmore was about to walk into my daughter's dining room and reveal just how badly my family had underestimated me. Ethan opened the front door with the confidence of a man expecting the room to confirm everything he believed about himself. I could not see Richard from where I sat, but I heard Ethan's voice change immediately. "Mr. Whitmore, what an honor." The dining room went silent. Bradley straightened in his chair. Megan quickly set down her wineglass and smoothed the front of her dress. Allison looked from the hallway to me, confusion spreading across her face. A moment later, Richard Whitmore stepped into the room. He was taller than Ethan, with silver at his temples and the calm expression of a man who did not need to announce his authority. He wore a dark suit without anything flashy about it. Beside him stood a woman in her early 50s carrying a leather portfolio. Ethan walked backward into the dining room, smiling too broadly. "I wasn't expecting you personally," he said. "We could have arranged a more formal meeting." Richard did not answer. Ethan extended his hand. "Ethan Jordan, we have the regional distribution proposal under review." Richard glanced at the offered hand, then looked past him. His eyes found me immediately. The seriousness in his face softened. He walked straight around Ethan and came toward my chair. "Mrs. Jordan," he said. I stood. Richard embraced me carefully, the way someone hugs a person connected to memories too important for public explanation. "I'm sorry this had to happen here," he said quietly. "You arrived at the right time." He stepped back and held both my hands. "It is good to see you." Behind him, no one moved. Ethan's hand slowly dropped to his side. Richard turned toward the woman with the portfolio. "This is Linda Carver, Senior Counsel for Whitmore Medical Technologies." Linda nodded to me respectfully. "Mrs. Jordan, thank you for coming." Megan was the first to recover. She stood and smiled as though she had been expecting honored guests all evening. "Please sit down. We were just having dinner." Richard looked at the table, then at the gray folder beneath my hand. "I can see that." Bradley rose. "Mr. Whitmore, Bradley Reed. Ethan has told us a great deal about the opportunity your company is considering. I'm sure he has, Richard said. There was no warmth in his voice. Ethan laughed nervously. Mom, you never mentioned that you knew Mr. Whitmore. I looked at him. You never asked. That is not the kind of thing someone forgets to mention. You seemed certain I had nothing important to say. His face tightened. Richard pulled out the empty chair beside me, but he did not sit. I had hoped to discuss private corporate matters with Mrs. Jordan tomorrow morning, he said. However, after speaking with her attorney and reviewing developments connected to this address, we agreed it would be safer to come tonight. Allison gripped the back of her chair. Safer? Richard did not answer her yet. Instead, he looked at me. Would you like me to explain the acquisition first? I nodded. He opened the portfolio Linda handed him and removed a thin packet of documents. The board met this afternoon, he said. After several months of negotiations, we approved the final terms of the acquisition. Ethan looked from Richard to me. What acquisition? Richard continued speaking to me. The remaining conditions are regulatory confirmation and shareholder approval. Because of the size and classification of your original holdings, your authorization is required before the transaction can close. Bradley frowned. Her holdings? Megan sat down slowly. Richard placed the documents in front of me. You remain one of the largest individual shareholders outside the executive group. No one spoke. The candle between Ethan and Bradley flickered in the silence. Allison stared at me as if she had never seen my face before. Mom, she whispered. What is he talking about? I kept my eyes on Richard. Has the final valuation changed? It has increased slightly since our last conversation. How much? He answered without drama. Based on the final structure, your portion is expected to be worth approximately $28 million before taxes and transaction costs. Megan's fork slipped from her hand and struck the plate. The sound was sharp enough to make Sophie jump. Bradley sat down heavily. Ethan did not move at all. His face seemed emptied of expression, as if his mind had rejected the words before they could settle. $28 million, Allison said. Richard nodded. That is the current estimate. Ethan finally laughed. It was a strange, breathless sound. There has to be some mistake. Richard turned toward him for the first time. There is no mistake. My mother lives in a one-bedroom apartment. I am aware of where Mrs. Jordan lives. She takes the bus. That is also not relevant to the ownership records. Megan leaned toward me. Catherine, why didn't you tell us? Her tone had changed completely. The woman who had mocked my thrift store habits minutes earlier now sounded injured by my privacy. I was not permitted to discuss the transaction, I said. But surely you could have told family that you owned part of the company. I could have told people I trusted. She looked away. Bradley recovered more quickly than the others. He leaned forward with the careful expression he used when attempting to regain control. This is extraordinary news. It changes the entire situation. No, I said. It only changes what you know. He glanced at the folder beneath my hand. What I mean is the guarantee becomes far less risky. Linda Carver looked directly at him. That is not an appropriate conclusion. Bradley stopped speaking. Ethan stepped closer to the table. How did this happen? Richard's eyes hardened. Your mother invested in my company before it was a company anyone wanted to invest in. He turned slightly so everyone could hear him. When banks rejected me and established manufacturers dismissed the market, I wanted to serve Catherine, and Thomas Jordan studied my work. They risked their own money and helped me continue. Sophie looked at me with open wonder. Richard continued. Mrs. Jordan did more than provide capital. She organized early records, reviewed invoices, and helped us build systems before we could afford staff. Thomas improved the original equipment housing with his own hands. Allison covered her mouth. I could see old memories returning to her. The nights I had spent sorting papers at the dining table. The times Thomas had gone to the workshop after dinner to help a young engineer, as we had called Richard then. My children had been too young to understand what we were building. Later, they had never bothered to ask. Richard looked at me again. My company exists today because your parents believed useful work deserved a chance. The room remained silent. Megan moved her chair slightly closer to mine. I always knew there was more to you than you let people see. I looked at her. 10 minutes ago, you believed I needed help paying my electric bill? Her cheeks flushed. I was only concerned. No, you were entertained. She lowered her eyes. Ethan still looked stunned, but I could see calculation beginning beneath the shock. If Mom is a major shareholder, he said, then my distribution proposal should have had strong internal support. Richard's expression did not change. Your proposal did receive special attention. Ethan's confidence returned by a fraction. I knew it. You misunderstand. Richard reached for the gray folder in front of me. Bradley placed his hand over it. That contains private family documents. Linda opened her portfolio again. Those documents are connected to a corporate application and possible financial fraud. They are no longer only a private family matter. Allison sank into her chair. Sophie looked at me frightened now. Ethan's face tightened. What exactly are you accusing us of? Richard did not answer immediately. He looked around the table at the expensive dinner, the untouched plates, and the people who had laughed when my son called me useless. Then he spoke in a voice so calm that it felt more dangerous than anger. I did not come here only because the board needs Mrs. Jordan's approval. He placed a second file beside the first. I came because your regional distribution application contains her property records, confidential financial information, and a signature that does not appear to belong to her. The last trace of color disappeared from Ethan's face. No one at that table was thinking about $28 million anymore. For several seconds, no one spoke. The only sound in the dining room was the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel. Ethan stared at Richard's file. What do you mean the signature doesn't appear to belong to her? Linda Carver opened the folder and removed several printed pages. I mean, our legal department compared the signature on your application with Mrs. Jordan's original shareholder agreements, voting authorizations, and recent corporate records. She placed 2 enlarged copies side by side on the table. Even from where I sat, the difference was obvious. The signature on my original documents was steady and slightly slanted with a long loop in the letter K. The signature on Ethan's application looked stiff-copied and hesitant. Megan leaned forward. Maybe Catherine signed differently because she was tired. I did not sign it, I said. Her eyes moved to me. Are you certain? I almost laughed. A stranger might have asked that question out of caution. Coming from my daughter-in-law, it was another way of suggesting I no longer understood my own actions. Yes, Megan, I am certain when someone else writes my name. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down. This is being blown out of proportion. Richard remained standing. A forged financial guarantee is not a minor clerical issue. It wasn't forged. Then who signed it? Ethan looked toward Bradley. Bradley's face hardened. Don't look at me. You prepared the property documents. I gave you copies because you said Whitmore needed proof of available collateral. You said the lender needed the workshop information. Bradley pushed his chair back. And you said your mother had already agreed. I said she would agree. The words escaped before Ethan could stop them. Linda's expression did not change, but I saw her write something on a legal pad. Allison looked at her brother. You told us Mom had already given permission. Ethan turned toward her. You knew we were using the property. I knew Bradley wanted to propose it. I did not know anyone had submitted her name. Bradley laughed bitterly. That is convenient. Allison stared at him. What is that supposed to mean? You were in the room when we discussed the guarantee. I thought it was a draft. You knew the deadline. I did not know there was a signature. Their voices rose, each one trying to move farther away from responsibility. I sat quietly and watched the family alliance collapse. Until that moment, they had spoken as one. They had told me the plan was safe, reasonable, and necessary. Now that the truth was in the room, every person wanted to become the least guilty member of the group. Richard placed another page on the table. This is the regional distribution application submitted under Ethan Jordan's name. Ethan looked at it but did not touch it. Richard continued. The proposal states that Catherine Jordan personally guarantees the operation. It lists Thomas Jordan's workshop as commercial collateral and references future proceeds from a private equity transaction. My stomach tightened even though I already knew part of the truth. Allison looked at me. Future proceeds? The acquisition, Richard said. Bradley turned sharply toward Ethan. You said the money was only a possibility. Ethan's voice rose. It was a possibility. You knew about $28 million. I didn't know the amount. I looked at him carefully. How did you know there would be any payment at all? He did not answer. Richard did. Our review found that someone accessed confidential references connected to Mrs. Jordan's shareholder position. The information was incomplete, but it was specific enough to suggest that a major transaction was expected. Linda slid a copy of an email toward Ethan. This message refers to Catherine's upcoming corporate payout as additional security. Megan read the sentence aloud under her breath. Then she turned to her husband. You told me she had no money. I thought she had no available money. That is not what you said. He ignored her. I felt a different kind of pain then. It was not the shock of learning that my name had been used. Samuel and Richard had already prepared me for that. It was the realization that Ethan had known or at least suspected I might receive something valuable. He had mocked my apartment and my coupons while quietly planning to reach money I had never promised him. Richard looked at me. Mrs. Jordan, did you authorize Ethan Bradley or anyone else in this room to use your shareholder information? No. Did you authorize the workshop as collateral? No. Did you sign the distribution guarantee? No. Linda placed the pages back in order. Then the company's position is clear. Ethan stood again. Wait, you cannot make a legal determination at a dinner table. No one is doing that, Linda said. We are preserving evidence and confirming Mrs. Jordan's account. Bradley pointed toward the documents. This was a family financing arrangement. There was no intention to steal anything. I looked at him. You submitted my property without permission. We plan to obtain your signature tonight. After the application had already been submitted, the lender required preliminary documents. That does not make them mine. Bradley rubbed both hands over his face. You do not understand the pressure we were under. I understand pressure. I spent years caring for a dying husband while negotiating medical bills. I never forged my children's names to make my life easier. He looked away. Allison began crying again. Mom, I swear I did not know the signature was false. I wanted to believe her, but belief was no longer something I could hand out simply because someone cried. Did you know Bradley intended to use the workshop? Yes. Did you ask me? No. Did you know I was being invited here to sign something? She hesitated. Yes. Did you tell me before I arrived? No. Her voice broke. I nodded slowly. Then you may not have written my name Allison, but you helped bring me to the table. She covered her face. Sophie appeared in the doorway. She must have been listening from the kitchen. Her eyes were red and she was holding the edge of the wall as though she needed support. Allison noticed her. Sophie, go upstairs. No, this is not for you. Sophie looked at me instead of her mother. I could see fear in her face, but also something else. Guilt. Ethan noticed it too. Why is she looking at you like that? No one answered. Richard closed the file. The company has suspended Ethan's proposal. All documents, emails, and attachments have been preserved. Ethan's face twisted. You had no right to do that before hearing my explanation. We reviewed your written explanation, Richard said. It contradicted the records. Bradley looked toward Linda. Have you contacted the police? Not at this stage. The entire room seemed to inhale. Linda continued. Mrs. Jordan requested that we secure the evidence before taking further action. Every head turned toward me. Ethan stared. You knew yes. How long? Long enough to give you several opportunities to tell me the truth. His expression shifted from fear to anger. So, this was a trap? No, I said. A trap forces someone into wrongdoing. I came here and waited to see whether any of you would choose honesty. Bradley looked at the gray folder. Allison lowered her hands. Megan said nothing. Richard turned toward me. Would you like to explain how you first learned about the documents? Before I could answer, Sophie stepped fully into the room. Her voice trembled. I told her. Allison froze. Bradley slowly turned toward his daughter. Sophie lifted her chin, though tears were running down her face. I found the files on Dad's computer. The silence that followed was heavier than everything that had come before. Allison stared at Sophie as though the room had shifted beneath her feet. You did what Sophie wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. I found the files on Dad's computer. Bradley stood so quickly that his chair struck the wall behind him. You went through my private documents. I wasn't looking for them. His voice sharpened. Then how did you find them? Sophie flinched, but she did not step back. I was using your computer for my history project because mine kept freezing. A folder opened when I clicked the recent files list. What folder? She looked at me before answering. One called Catherine Jordan. Bradley's face changed. It was not confusion. It was recognition. Sophie continued, her voice trembling more with every sentence. There were copies of Grandma's driver's license, the workshop deed tax records, and pages with her signature. Allison slowly lowered herself into her chair. Why didn't you tell me? Sophie turned toward her mother. Because I heard you and Dad talking about getting Grandma to sign at the anniversary dinner. That doesn't mean I heard Dad say she would sign if everyone made her understand she had no other way to help. Bradley pointed at her. You misunderstood an adult conversation. No, I didn't. The firmness in Sophie's answer surprised everyone. For most of her life, she had been the quietest person in the family. She apologized when someone else bumped into her. She avoided arguments and often changed the subject when Ethan or Megan mocked me. But that night, she stood in the doorway with tears on her face and told the truth more clearly than any adult in the room. She looked at me. I'm sorry, Grandma. I rose from my chair. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have told you sooner. You told me when you understood something was wrong. Bradley gave a bitter laugh. You encouraged this. I turned toward him. I encouraged my granddaughter to trust her conscience. You turned her against her parents. I did not need to. His face darkened, but Richard stepped slightly closer to the table. Mr. Reed, I suggest you be very careful about how you speak to her. Bradley looked at Richard, then at Linda, and seemed to remember that every word mattered now. Sophie drew a shaky breath. The folder had emails too. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What emails? She hesitated. I placed a hand on her shoulder. You do not have to repeat everything. Yes, I do, she said. Then she looked directly at her uncle. One email said Grandma was easy to pressure because she was lonely. Ethan looked away. Another silence filled the room. Sophie continued. There was another one about making sure she didn't take the documents to a lawyer. Megan turned toward Ethan. Did you write that? It was taken out of context. What context makes that acceptable? He did not answer. Sophie's voice dropped. There was one more. It said that if Grandma thought the family would lose the house, she would feel too guilty to refuse. Allison covered her mouth. I felt no surprise. Richard's attorneys had already shown me copies, but hearing the words spoken aloud by a 16-year-old gave them a different weight. The cruelty was not impulsive. It had been planned. Sophie told us how she had used her phone to photograph the files. She waited until Bradley was outside speaking with a contractor, then sent the images to me from her bedroom. When my phone rang that evening, I had been folding laundry. Grandma, she had whispered, do you know Dad has copies of your documents? At first, I thought she meant ordinary family records. Then the photographs arrived. I saw my driver's license, the deed to Thomas's workshop, and a scanned page containing several examples of my signature. One image showed an email chain between Ethan and Bradley discussing lender deadlines. Another referred to the possible Whitmore transaction. The final photograph showed a guarantee bearing my name. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed holding the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Did anyone see you take these? I asked. No. Do not confront your parents. Are they stealing from you? I could hear how frightened she was. I don't know everything yet. Should I tell Mom I wanted to say yes? Allison was my daughter. Part of me still believed she would stop the plan if she understood how serious it was. But one of the emails included a message from her. She had written, Mom won't want us to lose the house. Just don't overwhelm her with too many details. That sentence told me Allison already knew enough. Do not say anything yet, I told Sophie. I need you to act normally. She began crying quietly. I feel like I'm betraying them. No, sweetheart. You are preventing someone from being harmed. The next morning, I contacted Samuel Price. By noon, he had spoken with the county recorder's office and requested copies of every filing connected to the workshop. That afternoon, I called Richard and told him what Sophie had found. Richard's legal team moved quickly. They preserved Ethan's application, internal emails, attached guarantees, and every document uploaded through the company's system. Samuel contacted the lender connected to Bradley's construction business and discovered that preliminary materials had been circulated under my name. Nothing had been completed because the final authorization was missing. That was why they needed me at the dinner. They needed a real signature to cover the false one. Back in Allison's dining room, Ethan looked at Sophie with anger he was no longer trying to hide. You had no right to photograph private business records. Sophie stepped closer to me. They had Grandma's name on them. You're a child. You had no idea what you were seeing. She understood more than any of you hoped she would, I said. Ethan turned on me. You used her as a spy. No, I protected her after she came to me. You should have told us, so you could erase the files. Bradley looked down. That was answer enough. Allison rose and approached Sophie. Why didn't you trust me? Sophie's face crumpled. I wanted to. The pain in those 3 words seemed to break something in Allison. I'm your mother. I know. Then why did you call Grandma instead of me? Sophie looked at the table, the folder, and the pen that had been placed beside my plate. Because you already knew they wanted her to sign. Allison's lips parted, but no words came. You kept telling me not to ask questions, Sophie continued. You said adults were handling it, but every time Grandma came over, everyone talked about her like she was stupid. I never said she was stupid. You didn't stop them. Allison began to cry again. This time I did not move to comfort her. Some pain teaches us what kindness cannot. Ethan shook his head. This family is being destroyed because a teenager misunderstood some documents. No, Richard said. This family is facing the consequences of adults who understood those documents very well. Megan folded her arms tightly. So what happens now? Linda answered. That depends partly on Mrs. Jordan's instructions and partly on the institutions involved. Bradley looked at me. Kathy, please, we can still resolve this privately. I had not allowed him to call me Kathy in years. You had the chance to resolve it privately by asking permission. We were under pressure. Pressure did not write my signature. Ethan leaned forward. You're enjoying this. The accusation startled me more than the insults had. Do you honestly believe that You sat here knowing Richard was coming? You let us talk. I let you choose. You wanted to humiliate us. I looked around the room. At Allison's tears, at Bradley's fear, at Megan's sudden silence, at my son who still believed he was the injured party. Then I looked at Sophie. She had risked peace in her own home to protect me when everyone else believed I had nothing worth protecting. No, Ethan, I said. I wanted one of you to tell the truth before someone else had to. He scoffed. Don't make Sophie into a hero. I don't have to. She became one when she did the right thing without knowing there would be any reward. His eyes flicked toward Richard's acquisition papers. That small movement told me everything. You all treated me as though I had no value, I said. Sophie treated me like a human being before she knew about $28 million. No one answered, because there was nothing they could say. Richard quietly closed his folder. Linda gathered the copied signatures. Sophie leaned against me exhausted. And for the first time that evening, Allison looked at her daughter not as a child who had disobeyed, but as a mirror, showing her the person she had become. For a long moment, no one moved. Sophie remained beside me, one hand gripping the fabric of my sleeve. Richard and Linda stood quietly near the table, giving me space to speak. Ethan looked from the forged signature to the acquisition documents as though he still believed there was some combination of words that could restore his position. Bradley was the first to try. Catherine, he said, we made mistakes. No one is denying that. But now that everything is out in the open, we can solve this without destroying the family. I looked at him. The family was not destroyed by the truth. He lowered his voice. You know what I mean. Yes, I said. You mean you want the consequences to disappear. Allison wiped her face and pulled out a chair for Sophie, but Sophie did not sit. She stayed beside me. Ethan folded his arms. So what was the plan, Mom? You knew before you came here. You knew Richard was coming. You knew there was an investigation. Yet you sat at this table and let everyone talk. I did. To embarrass us, to give you a chance. He laughed once. A chance to do what? To tell me the truth. The room went quiet again. I looked at each of them in turn. When you called me about the workshop, Ethan, I asked why you wanted to know whose name was on the deed. He said nothing. When Bradley spoke about simplifying my estate, I asked whether any documents had already been submitted. Bradley looked toward the floor. When Allison invited me here, I asked what the family needed to discuss. My daughter closed her eyes. I asked direct questions. I continued. Every one of you had an opportunity to tell me what was happening. You would have refused anyway, Bradley said. That was my right. You don't understand how close we were to losing everything. You decided that your fear gave you authority over my property. Bradley pressed both hands against the table. I built that company for 18 years, and I was married to Thomas for 41. That did not give me permission to sign his name without consent. He looked away. Ethan stepped closer. You keep acting as if we stole money from your purse. The workshop was going to secure a legitimate project. The application also reached for any future assets in my name. That is standard contract language. You said I would not understand the contract. I was frustrated. No, you were depending on my confusion. He opened his mouth, but I continued before he could interrupt. The document you placed in front of me tonight was not only a guarantee. It included language confirming earlier submissions. If I had signed it, you could have claimed I approved everything from the beginning. Linda gave a small nod. That is correct. Allison turned toward Bradley. You told me the papers were only for the new loan. They were. Linda answered before he could continue. The agreement contained a ratification clause. Mrs. Jordan's signature would have validated prior representations made in her name. Allison stared at her husband. You knew that Bradley's silence was enough. Her expression changed. Until then, she had been frightened, guilty, and ashamed. Now I saw something new in her face. Recognition. She was beginning to understand that Bradley had not merely included her in a desperate plan. He had also hidden parts of it from her. Ethan pointed toward the acquisition packet. None of this matters now. Mom has enough money to protect the workshop and help us recover. I looked at him. You still believe this is about whether I can afford the risk. It changes the situation. No, it reveals your motive. Megan sat straighter. What is that supposed to mean? It means Ethan apologized only after hearing the number. I apologized because things became more serious than I realized, Ethan said. You called me useless less than an hour ago. I was angry. You said my opinion did not matter because I was broke. I shouldn't have said that. Would you be saying that now if Richard had not walked through the door? He stared at me. I waited. No answer came. His silence hurt, but it also freed me from pretending. Bradley attempted a softer approach. Catherine, no one is asking you to forget what happened. But if the transaction is worth $28 million, you could provide a limited loan. We could draft proper documents this time. Richard's expression hardened. This is not an investment discussion. Bradley ignored him. I could repay you with interest. Ethan's distribution company could still operate independently. We could all benefit. All of you already decided how my money should be used before I even received it. We're trying to save what we built, with what I built. Ethan slammed his palm against the table. We are your children. Yes, that should mean something. It does. That is why this hurts. He took a breath, forcing his voice lower. Families help each other. Families ask. They do not forge. Allison began to speak, then stopped. I turned to her. Say it! Her voice trembled. I was afraid. Of what? Losing the house. Losing everything people thought we had. People, our friends, Bradley's clients, the neighbors, everyone. I studied my daughter. You were willing to risk my home to protect the appearance of yours? Tears filled her eyes. I didn't think of it that way. That does not make it less true. She looked toward Sophie. I kept telling myself the workshop was just sitting there. I thought we would fix everything before you ever knew. You thought my ignorance would protect you from guilt. She covered her mouth and began crying again. This time, she did not ask me to comfort her. That was the first honest thing she had done all evening. Ethan paced toward the window. So, what happens now? You let the company report us. You watch Bradley lose his business. You let Allison lose her home. I will not interfere with lawful consequences. You could stop them. I could also teach you that any betrayal can be erased if the victim has enough money. He turned sharply. You're choosing strangers over your family? No. I am choosing not to finance dishonesty. Megan spoke from her chair. What about us? Ethan's career could be ruined. Ethan made decisions involving his career. He was trying to create something for our future. He was trying to build it on my signature. Richard stepped closer. For clarity, Mr. Jordan's distribution proposal is suspended. The evidence will remain preserved regardless of what Mrs. Jordan chooses to do with her personal funds. Ethan looked at him with open resentment. You never intended to approve me. We intended to evaluate your proposal honestly, Richard said. You made that impossible. Ethan turned back to me. Then help me start somewhere else. I felt almost calm. No. The word was quieter than his anger, but it stopped him. No loans, I continued. No guarantees. No rescue funds. No access to the acquisition payment. Megan's face tightened. What about inheritance? The question escaped before she could hide it. Everyone looked at her. She flushed. I only mean that Catherine should think carefully before making permanent decisions while emotions are high. My decisions are not emotional, I said. I looked at Ethan and Allison. You are still my children. I still love you. But love does not require me to reward cruelty or protect fraud. Allison lowered her head. Ethan's expression hardened again. So you're cutting us out. I am removing your access to decisions that belong to me. That is the same thing. No. It only feels the same to someone who believed access was an entitlement. Richard remained silent, but I could feel his support beside me. I placed my hand over the gray folder. I did not come here to trap you. I came because I wanted to believe one of you would look at me and say, Mom, we made a terrible mistake. No one interrupted. I gave you every opening. Instead, you mocked my clothes, my apartment, my bus pass, and the way I buy groceries. You tried to make me feel small enough to surrender. Sophie's fingers tightened around mine. The forgery was a crime, I said, but the deepest betrayal was believing I was too old, too poor, and too alone to protect myself. Ethan looked away first. I closed the folder. The answer is still no. And for the first time that evening, no one tried to move the pen back toward me. Bradley stared at the closed folder beneath my hand. For several seconds, his face remained completely still. Then the fear behind his eyes gave way to anger. You cannot make this decision by yourself, he said. I looked at him. Which decision? The workshop. The workshop belongs to me. It belonged to Thomas. Yes, and after his death, it passed legally to me. Bradley pushed away from the table and began pacing. That building was part of this family long before any of us started having financial problems. Ethan spent summers there. Allison grew up watching her father work there. Sophie is Thomas's granddaughter. None of that makes the deed communal property. You know that isn't what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. To Bradley, family history had suddenly become a legal argument because sentiment was the only claim he had left. He pointed toward the window as though the workshop were visible beyond the dark glass. Thomas would never have wanted you to hold that property over everyone's head. I am not holding it over anyone's head. You are refusing to use it when your daughter could lose her home. Allison looked down. The fact that she did not defend him seemed to make Bradley angrier. He turned toward her. Say something. She lifted her eyes slowly. What do you want me to say? That the workshop belongs to the family. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It doesn't. Bradley stared at her. For the first time that evening, Allison had openly disagreed with her husband. The change was small, but I felt it. Bradley's jaw tightened. Fine. If Catherine wants to pretend this is only about a deed, then perhaps a judge should decide. Sophie stepped closer to me. Allison looked alarmed. Bradley, stop. No. I've spent years helping this family. I've maintained connections, supported Ethan's plans, and kept this house running. I am not going to stand here while she gives away an asset that should eventually benefit her children. I remained seated. Are you threatening to sue me? I am saying there may be legal questions. Linda Carver spoke for the first time in several minutes. There are no legal questions concerning current ownership. Mrs. Jordan's attorney has already verified the title. Bradley looked at her sharply. You represent Whitmore Medical Technologies, not the Jordan family. That is correct. But I have reviewed the documents connected to the fraudulent application. He turned back to me. You planned all of this. I protected myself by hiding your money. My money was never yours to discover. By moving the workshop. The room became quiet. Ethan looked at me. What does he mean, moving the workshop? I folded my hands on the table. After Sophie contacted me, Samuel and I took steps to protect the property. Bradley stopped pacing. What steps? The workshop is no longer held in my personal estate. His face changed. Allison frowned. What does that mean? It means the property has been transferred into a protected charitable trust. No one spoke. Bradley stared at me as though he had not understood the words. You transferred it. Yes. After we confirmed that documents had been submitted using my name. You had no right to do that. A quiet disbelief came over me. I had every right. It was my property. Ethan moved closer to the table. Can the transfer be reversed? No. His question told me more than any apology could have. He was still thinking about access. Bradley dragged a hand through his hair. You moved nearly $1 million in commercial property into a charity. I moved Thomas's workshop into a trust designed to continue the kind of work he believed in. What kind of work? I looked toward Sophie. She already knew part of the plan. Her frightened expression softened slightly. The building will become the Thomas Jordan Skills Center. Allison repeated the name quietly. The Thomas Jordan Skills Center. Yes. I reached into my handbag and removed a folded brochure Samuel had helped me prepare for the trust meeting. I placed it on the table. The center will provide vocational training to people who need a second beginning. Widows returning to the workforce, veterans adjusting to civilian life, workers displaced by factory closures, young adults who cannot afford traditional college. Sophie picked up the brochure. On the front was a simple drawing of the workshop restored, but still recognizable. Bradley laughed without humor. You are giving Thomas's property to strangers. I am using it to help people build stable lives. What about your own children? My children were given education opportunities and years of support. Ethan's face hardened. So that is it. You help strangers while we lose everything. I am not causing your losses. You could prevent them. Not without teaching you that responsibility belongs to whoever can afford to erase your mistakes. Richard stepped beside the table. Whitmore Medical Technologies has agreed to support one part of the center. Ethan turned toward him. Of course you have. Richard ignored the hostility. We will help establish a medical equipment repair program. Students will learn to inspect, maintain, and service essential devices used by clinics and smaller hospitals. He looked at me. Thomas believed equipment should be built so ordinary technicians could repair it. This honors that idea. The words brought a pressure to my chest. Thomas had spent his life believing useful knowledge should be shared. He never guarded a skill simply to make himself feel important. I reached into my handbag again. This time I removed an envelope. The paper was soft at the edges from being handled many times. Allison recognized the handwriting immediately. Dad wrote that yes. Thomas had written the letter during his final month at home. He had been too weak to return to the workshop, but his mind remained clear. One afternoon while I was changing the sheets, he asked for a pen and several pieces of paper. He sealed the letter before giving it to me. Read this when money begins making people forget who they are, he had said. At the time, I thought illness had made him overly cautious. Now I understood. I opened the letter. My dear Catherine, I read if the workshop survives, me do not let anyone treat it as a prize waiting to be divided. Allison lowered her head. I continued. Ethan and Allison may one day confuse inheritance with proof of love. Remind them that we raised them to build lives, not wait for ours to end. Ethan turned toward the window. My voice trembled, but I kept reading. The workshop mattered because it gave people dignity. A young man came through the door uncertain, and I could teach him something that helped him stand straighter when he left. Woodworking was never only about furniture. It was about showing people they could create repair and begin again. Sophie pressed the brochure against her chest. The final paragraph was the hardest. If our children honor what we taught them, they will not need the building. If they forget, giving it to them will not restore what is missing. Use it where it can do the most good. I lowered the letter. No one spoke for a long time. Allison was crying silently. Not the frightened tears she had cried earlier, but something deeper. She looked around the expensive dining room, then at the brochure in Sophie's hands. Dad really wanted this. He wanted the workshop to remain useful. Bradley shook his head. He did not know what our circumstances would become. No, I said, but he understood character. Ethan turned back toward me. So we received nothing. This is not a reading of my will. It might as well be. I stood. You keep hearing punishment where I am describing purpose. You are choosing other people over us. No, Ethan. I am choosing not to give valuable property to people who tried to take it without permission. His expression twisted. You make it sound like we are thieves. I held his gaze. You forged my signature and used my property in a financial application. What word would you prefer? He looked away. Allison reached for the letter. May I read it? I handed it to her. She held the pages as though they were something fragile and sacred. Bradley watched her, his anger now mixed with fear. Allison, he said, do not let this change what matters. We are about to lose our home. She looked at him across the table. Then she looked at Sophie. Finally, she looked at me. What matters has already changed, she said. Bradley's face went pale. I knew the fight was not over. The investigation's debts and legal consequences were still waiting beyond that dining room. But for the first time, my daughter was no longer standing behind her husband's fear. She was standing in front of the truth. The days after the anniversary dinner did not feel like victory. They felt like walking through the remains of a house after a fire, grateful to be alive, but unable to ignore everything that had been destroyed. Richard's legal team formally notified the institutions connected to Ethan's proposal and Bradley's financing application. Samuel contacted the county recorder's office, the commercial lender, and the attorney representing the charitable trust that now held Thomas's workshop. By Monday morning, Bradley's loan application had been frozen. By Tuesday, his company's accounts were under review. By Wednesday, 2 major clients had postponed contracts. The speed of it shocked everyone except Linda Carver. Fraud involving collateral creates risk for every party connected to the transaction, she explained when we met at Samuel's office. Once the documents are challenged, lenders and clients protect themselves first. I understood the logic. That did not make it easy to watch. Bradley called me 17 times that week. I answered only once. His voice was lower than usual. Catherine, I need you to tell the lender this was a misunderstanding. It was not. If you confirm that you intended to cooperate, they may release the hold. I did not intend to cooperate. You know what this is doing to my company. What did you think it would do to me? He was silent. I continued. If I had signed those papers, I could have lost the workshop and become responsible for debts I did not create. But you have money. The sentence came so naturally that I almost missed what it revealed. He still believed harm counted only when the victim could not afford it. My ability to survive your actions does not make them acceptable, I said. He began to argue, but I ended the call. Ethan's consequences arrived just as quickly. Whitmore Medical Technologies permanently rejected his distribution proposal. Richard also informed Ethan's employer that the documents submitted under his name contained false financial representations and unauthorized collateral. His company placed him on administrative leave. Megan called me that same evening. This is ruining him, she said. I did not submit the false application. You know how competitive his field is. If this becomes public, no one will trust him. That is not a consequence I created. He was desperate. He was dishonest. She sighed sharply. You keep speaking as though you have never made a mistake. I have made many mistakes. I have never forged another person's signature and then insulted them for refusing to approve it. Her voice changed. Are you enjoying this? It was the second time someone had asked me that. No. Then stop it. I cannot stop an investigation simply because the truth became inconvenient. You could pay Bradley his debts. You could help Ethan start somewhere else. $28 million is more than you could ever spend. There it was again. Not remorse. Calculation. I ended the call. Within days, other relatives began contacting me. A cousin I had not heard from in 3 years called to say family matters should remain private. Thomas's younger brother Harold told me Ethan had always been ambitious and that ambitions sometimes cause people to cut corners. An aunt on Allison's side insisted that a mother should never allow money to come between her and her children. I listened until she finished. Money did not come between us, I said. Entitlement did. She did not call again. The cruelest conversations were the ones that began with sympathy. People asked how I was coping, then slowly moved toward the same question. Could I not simply pay the debts? Could I not protect Allison's house? Could I not withdraw my complaint? Could I not think of Sophie? As though protecting Sophie meant teaching her that the truth should disappear whenever the consequences became painful. I refused every request, not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I understood that rescuing them would confirm their belief that my role in the family was to absorb whatever damage they caused. At night, I sat alone in my apartment and wondered whether I had done the right thing. Those were the moments no one saw. They saw the woman who had said no at the dining table. They did not see me wake at 2 a.m. remembering Ethan at 7 years old asleep on my shoulder during a long car ride. They did not see me stand in my kitchen holding one of Allison's childhood drawings and asking myself when fear had become more important to her than honesty. Justice did not feel satisfying. It felt necessary. There is a difference. For nearly 3 weeks, Allison did not call me. Sophie texted every evening. She told me she was safe. She said her parents argued constantly. She asked whether she had caused everything. Each time I gave her the same answer. You revealed what was already happening. You did not create it. I did not criticize Allison or Bradley to her. I wanted Sophie to know the truth without being forced to carry adult hatred. Then Allison stopped answering even Sophie's messages when the girl stayed with me for a weekend. I called once. No response. Samuel advised me to give her time. Richard said the same thing. But time can feel cruel when it is filled with silence. Almost a month after the dinner, Allison appeared at my apartment. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back without care. She wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and no makeup. I had not seen her look that ordinary in years. Sophie was not with her. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She sat at my small kitchen table and looked around the apartment she had always treated like evidence of failure. For the first time, she seemed to notice that it was peaceful. "I left Bradley," she said. I did not speak immediately. "Where are you staying?" "A rental house near Sophie's school." "Is Sophie with you?" "Yes." I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Allison placed both hands around the cup of tea I gave her. I found more documents. What kind? Loans, credit lines, personal guarantees, some in the company's name, some connected to the house. My stomach tightened. "Did you sign them?" "Some." "And the others?" She stared into the tea. "I don't know." That answer frightened her more than it frightened me. Bradley had hidden far more debt than Allison understood. Several projects had been losing money for months. He had borrowed against the house more than once and used new contracts to cover old obligations. The forged application involving me had not been his first deception. It was simply the one that exposed everything else. "I kept believing we were one successful project away from fixing it," Allison said. Every time I asked questions, he told me I was panicking. "And Ethan?" "He knew Bradley was in trouble. I don't think he knew all of it." She wiped her eyes. "I stayed after the dinner because I was afraid to leave with nothing." I sat across from her. And what changed? I realized I already had nothing. I understood what she meant. The house, the furniture, the jewelry, the parties, none of it had protected her. It had only given her something expensive to fear losing. "I am not asking you for money," she said quickly. I believed she meant it in that moment. But I also knew fear could change people. "That is good," I said. She looked hurt. Part of me wanted to reach across the table and promise she would never struggle again. But love without boundaries had brought us to that room. "You need to learn what you can support on your own," I said. "I know. You need legal advice. I made an appointment. You need to understand every debt connected to your name." She nodded. For the first time, she was not asking me to remove the consequences. She was asking how to face them. Ethan did not change as quickly. His first letter arrived 2 weeks later. He blamed Bradley, Richard, Megan, and the pressure of providing for his family. He wrote that the scandal had damaged his health and left him unable to sleep. He said he hoped I could live with what I had done. I placed the letter in a drawer and did not respond. Justice had cost all of us something. Bradley was losing his business. Ethan was losing his career. Allison had lost her marriage and home. I had lost the comforting illusion that my children would protect me when I grew older. That loss hurt more than $28 million could ever repair, but painful truth was still better than a beautiful lie. Sophie began visiting me every Saturday. At first, I worried that spending so much time at my apartment would make her feel caught between two homes. I did not want her to believe she had to choose between loving her mother and loving me. So I established one rule. "We do not use you as a messenger," I told her. She was sitting at my kitchen table with colored pencils spread around a sketch of the future Thomas Jordan Skills Center. "What does that mean?" "It means I will not ask what your mother says about me, and she should not ask what I say about her. Sophie nodded slowly. And if one of you wants to know something, then the adults speak directly, she smiled. That sounds healthier than what we usually do. It was a sad observation for a 16-year-old, but it was also honest. Our Saturdays became the brightest part of my week. Sophie helped me review ideas for the center. She wanted a small library where students could study for certification exams. She suggested lockers for trainees who arrived directly from work and a quiet room for people who felt overwhelmed. Some people might be embarrassed to ask for help, she said. You understand that well. She looked down at the sketch. I think Grandma Margaret would have liked this. Sophie had never met Margaret Whitmore, but she had heard enough stories to understand why the center mattered. We chose soft gray walls, sturdy furniture, and large signs that clearly marked each training area. Sophie insisted the building should feel professional, not charitable. People should feel like they belong there, she said. Not like someone is doing them a favor. Thomas would have agreed. Allison never asked Sophie to bring messages, and I respected her for that. She was working at a small insurance office downtown and taking the bus most mornings. The first time Sophie mentioned it, she stopped suddenly as though she had broken our rule. I wasn't trying to report on her, she said. I know. She says the bus is not as terrible as she thought. I smiled. Most things are easier once we stop believing they are beneath us. Allison was living carefully now. Her rented house was smaller than the one she had shared with Bradley. She bought used furniture and cooked at home. She no longer attended the social events that had once seemed so important. But distance remained between us. Leaving Bradley was not the same as taking responsibility for the way she had treated me. I was willing to wait. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. Allison stood in the hallway alone. She wore a simple navy blouse and black pants from work. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail. There was no expensive handbag on her shoulder and no folder in her hands. Is Sophie here? I asked. No. Is something wrong? No. I came to talk to you. I let her inside. She sat in the same chair she had used when she told me she had left Bradley. This time she did not look around the apartment with surprise or pity. She looked directly at me. I owe you an apology. I waited. She folded her hands on the table. I have apologized before, but I kept explaining myself. I kept saying I was afraid or that Bradley pressured me. You were afraid? Yes, but that does not excuse what I did. Her voice shook, but she continued. I knew the anniversary dinner was not only a celebration, I knew they wanted you to sign documents. I knew Bradley planned to use the workshop as collateral. She paused. I did not know Ethan and Bradley had already submitted a false signature, but I knew enough to call you before that evening. I said nothing. Allison's eyes filled with tears. I should have warned you. Yes, the word hurt her, but I would not soften the truth. I also should have stopped the way everyone treated you, she continued. I watched Megan insult your dress. I listened to Ethan make fun of the way you bought groceries. She wiped one cheek. I told myself I was keeping the peace. What peace? She looked down. The kind that only existed because you were expected to absorb the cruelty. That was the first time she had described it accurately. I hid the quilt, she said. I had not expected her to mention that. You made something beautiful from pieces of my life, and I carried it into the hallway because I was afraid my friends would think a handmade gift looked cheap. Her voice broke. I am ashamed of that. The memory still hurt, but hearing her name, it mattered. I am sorry I made you feel small in a house you helped me build, she said. I am sorry I protected my comfort instead of protecting my mother. I studied her face. There was no request behind the apology, no mention of money, no suggestion that I should help with rent or legal bills, no demand that I forgive her so she could feel better. What do you want from me? I asked. Her expression tightened. I want to repair what I damaged. That is not something you can ask me to do for you. I know. Trust does not return because you finally found the right words. I know that too. I leaned back. Then what happens if I am not ready to forgive you? Allison took a slow breath. I keep changing anyway. That answer reached me more deeply than tears could have. I looked toward the small window above my sink. Rain had begun tapping against the glass. Forgiveness is not the same as returning everything to the way it was, I said. I do not want it to be the way it was. Neither do I. She nodded. I started setting aside money connected to the legal expenses. You are barely supporting yourself. I can pay a small amount each month. You may never repay everything. This is not about clearing a balance. I need to stop expecting other people to carry the cost of my decisions. I felt Thomas in that sentence. Not his voice exactly, but the kind of lesson he had tried to give our children years earlier. Allison reached into her purse and removed a folded sheet of paper. My body tensed before I could stop it. She noticed. It is not a request for money. She placed it on the table. It was a copy of her new employment agreement and a simple repayment schedule prepared with her attorney. The amount was modest, but it was realistic. I wanted you to know I am taking responsibility. I looked at the paper, then at my daughter. This does not repair everything. No, but it is a beginning. Her shoulders lowered slightly. We did not embrace that afternoon. Not because I did not love her, because I wanted our next embrace to come from trust, not relief. Before she left, I took the quilt from the hall closet. She stared at it. You kept it. It was yours. I thought you took it home after the dinner. I did. Sophie brought it to me. Allison touched the blue square from her old dress. May I have it now? I folded it carefully and placed it in her arms. This time display it because you value it. I will. 2 days later, Ethan's second letter arrived. The envelope contained only 1 page. He did not mention losing his job. He did not blame Bradley or Megan. He did not say stress had affected his health. He wrote that he had measured my worth by what I believed I could provide. He admitted that he had mocked my apartment, my clothes, and my choices because it made him feel more successful. He acknowledged that he had helped use my name without consent. The final paragraph read, I do not expect you to forgive me. I am beginning to understand that I wanted access to your resources without offering you respect. I am sorry for treating your love like something I owned. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it beside Thomas's photograph. I did not call Ethan. I did not send money. I did not mistake a truthful letter for permanent change. But for the first time since the anniversary dinner, I believed my son had written something that was not designed to manipulate me. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was only a door opened 1 inch. For the moment, that was enough. The acquisition closed 3 months later. On the morning the final papers were signed, Richard invited me to the headquarters of Whitmore Medical Technologies. I expected a quiet conference room and a stack of documents. Instead, several early employees were waiting. Some of them had joined the company when the office consisted of 2 rented rooms and a folding table. Others had heard stories about Thomas and me, but had never met us. Richard stood beside the conference table and raised a glass of sparkling water. To the woman who believed in useful work before anyone believed it could become a successful company, he said, I felt embarrassed by the attention. I only signed a check, I replied. Richard shook his head. You gave us time. That was more valuable. The final amount deposited into the trust established for me was slightly less than $28 million after taxes, transaction costs, and legal fees. It was still more money than I could fully comprehend. For several days, I checked the account repeatedly, not because I wanted to admire the number, but because part of me feared it might disappear. Then I closed the banking app and made tea. The apartment remained the same. The refrigerator still made a rattling sound at night. The woman downstairs still played gospel music on Sundays. My favorite mug still had a small crack near the handle. I did not feel transformed. I felt responsible. Samuel helped me create a financial plan before I spent anything. We established long-term healthcare protections, a secure retirement fund, and an emergency reserve large enough to ensure I would never again depend on someone who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. Then I bought a house. It was not a mansion. It was a comfortable brick home in a quiet neighborhood, 20 minutes from the workshop and 10 minutes from Sophie's school. It had wide doorways, a bedroom on the first floor, and a small garden behind the kitchen. When the realtor showed me the walk-in closet, she said, You could fit an entire department store in here. I laughed. I own 6 good dresses. She thought I was joking. The house mattered because it was safe and accessible. I could grow older there without stairs becoming a problem. There was space for Sophie to study and a guest room that did not come with expectations. I kept the apartment lease for 1 extra month while I moved slowly. On my final evening there, I sat near the window and watched the maple leaves move in the wind. That apartment had been treated as proof of my failure. But it had sheltered me while I grieved. It had taught me that peace could fit inside a small space. It had shown me how little I needed in order to remain myself. I left it with gratitude. The larger part of the acquisition money went into the Jordan Community Foundation, which was managed by an independent board. I included professionals from education, workforce development, nonprofit law, and financial oversight. No family member had personal control over the funds. That decision offended several relatives. One cousin asked why strangers should decide how family money was used. Because the money has a purpose, I told her, and purpose needs protection from emotion. The Thomas Jordan Skills Center quickly became the main focus of my days. The workshop had not been abandoned, but it needed extensive repairs. The roof leaked near the back storage area. The electrical system was outdated. One section of concrete had cracked during a harsh winter. I visited the site almost every morning. The first time I entered after construction began, the familiar scent of sawdust was gone. In its place were plaster dust, fresh lumber, and metal from the new ventilation system. Thomas's original workbench remained near the east wall. I had insisted that it stay. A contractor suggested refinishing it. No, I said. Leave the marks. The surface carried scratches, glue stains, and a dark burn where Thomas had once placed a hot tool without thinking. Those imperfections were part of its history. Richard visited regularly, but he never treated the center as a public relations project. He attended planning meetings, reviewed the medical equipment curriculum, and asked technicians what tools students would actually need. At one meeting, a marketing consultant suggested naming an entire wing after Whitmore Medical Technologies. Richard declined. "This is not an advertisement," he said. "It is a training center." He treated me as an equal partner, not a sentimental symbol attached to his success. That respect mattered more to me than any check. We interviewed instructors together. I wanted teachers who understood that adults returning to education often carried shame. Some had lost jobs, some had escaped difficult marriages, some had spent years caring for children or sick parents and no longer believed they had valuable skills. A retired electrician named Denise Carter told me, "People learn better when they are not afraid of being embarrassed." I hired her immediately. Sophie volunteered every Saturday. She organized donated books, labeled storage cabinets, and helped design the student welcome packets. She had inherited Thomas's patience and my habit of checking every detail twice. Allison also began rebuilding her life. She remained at the insurance office and earned a promotion after 6 months. The work was not glamorous, but she was proud of it because no one had handed it to her. She and Sophie moved into a slightly larger apartment using Allison's income and a carefully managed budget. The first time she invited me to dinner, the quilt I had made was displayed across the back of the living room sofa. She noticed me looking at it. "I tell everyone my mother made it," she said. We were not completely healed, but we were learning how to speak without pretending. Ethan's progress was slower. He had found work with a small logistics company after months of unemployment. The position paid less and carried no impressive title. Every month, he sent a modest payment toward the legal costs and damages associated with the false application. The first check included a note. "I know this amount is small. I am sending it because responsibility should not depend on whether repayment is convenient." I kept the note. Megan and Ethan were living separately by then. I heard that she blamed him for losing the life they had planned. Ethan did not ask me to intervene or help with their expenses. That was new. He wrote twice asking whether we could meet. I replied only once. Consistent change must come before reconciliation. Continue doing what is right even when no one rewards you for it. He sent back a simple answer. "I understand." As opening day approached, I faced one question I had avoided. Should Ethan be invited? Allison believed he should receive an invitation, but no special role. Sophie agreed. Richard left the decision entirely to me. "He is your son," he said. "But being your son does not automatically make him safe." That night, I sat at Thomas's workbench while the building was empty. The new lights were installed, but I left only one glowing above me. I thought about Ethan as a boy carefully sanding his first wooden birdhouse beside his father. Thomas had made him redo one uneven edge 3 times. "Good work is not punishment," Thomas had told him. "It is how you show respect for what you are building." Somewhere along the way, Ethan had stopped believing that, but perhaps he was beginning to remember. I mailed him an invitation. Not as a sponsor, not as a speaker, not as a son entitled to stand beside me. I invited him as a guest. The opening ceremony was 2 weeks away. I did not know whether Ethan would come, whether he would arrive with humility, or whether the invitation would awaken his old sense of entitlement. For the first time, I understood that offering someone a path back did not mean carrying them down it. The door could be opened. He would still have to choose how to walk through. The morning the Thomas Jordan Skills Center opened, I arrived before sunrise. The building stood at the edge of Columbus beneath a pale blue sky, its old brick walls cleaned, but not hidden beneath anything artificial. New windows reflected the first morning light. A simple metal sign above the entrance carried Thomas's name. I stood alone in front of it for several minutes. For 41 years, Thomas had entered that building with sawdust on his boots and a thermos in his hand. He had repaired furniture, built cabinets, and taught anyone willing to learn how to measure twice before making a cut. Now the workshop would open its doors again. But this time, people would arrive carrying their own hopes. Inside the main training area had been divided into several practical spaces. One section contained woodworking equipment. Another held electrical training panels. The new medical equipment laboratory occupied the West Wing, where students would learn to inspect and repair devices used by clinics and rural hospitals. Thomas's original workbench remained near the east wall. We had placed his old measuring tape and carpenter's pencil inside a glass display above it. Beneath them was a small plaque. "Useful work gives people dignity." Those were his words. By 8 o'clock, volunteers began arriving. Sophie came first, wearing a blue volunteer shirt and carrying 2 boxes of welcome packets. "You're early," I said. "So are you." "I own the building." She smiled. "The trust owns the building." I laughed. "That legal education is making you dangerous." She placed the boxes on a registration table and began checking every name against her list. Allison arrived 20 minutes later with trays of food for the community lunch. She wore a simple cream-colored dress and comfortable shoes. Months earlier, she would have worried about whether her outfit looked expensive enough. That morning, she worried only about whether we had enough coffee. She kissed my cheek. "You look beautiful, Mom." "Thank you." Her eyes moved toward Thomas's workbench. "I wish Dad could see this." "He saw the beginning." Allison nodded, fighting tears. Richard arrived with several Whitmore technicians and instructors from the company's training department. He shook hands with the volunteers and carried equipment boxes himself rather than waiting for someone else to do it. There were no photographers following him, no large company logos, only people ready to work. The first students entered just after 9. One was a 58-year-old widow named Carol, who wanted to train as an electrician after spending most of her adult life caring for her family. Another was Marcus, a former Army mechanic struggling to find stable civilian employment. A 19-year-old named Devin arrived with his aunt. He had left high school during a difficult year and believed he had ruined his future before it had properly begun. I welcomed each of them personally. Their nervousness reminded me of Richard at my kitchen table 27 years earlier. People often believe they need confidence before they begin. In truth, beginning is often how confidence is created. By 10, the main hall was full. Neighbors, local business owners, instructors, students, and former customers of Thomas stood beneath the restored wooden beams. Some remembered him. Others knew him only through stories. I stepped to the podium. My prepared speech rested in front of me, but when I looked at the room, I pushed it aside. My husband believed there was no shame in not knowing how to do something I began. The only shame was refusing to learn because pride made you afraid to ask. A few people smiled. Thomas built furniture here, but that was never the most important thing he created. He created confidence. People came through these doors uncertain, and he gave them work that allowed them to stand straighter when they left. I looked toward the first row where Allison and Sophie sat beside Richard. This center is not a gift from wealthy people to people without wealth. It is a place where knowledge will be shared with respect. No one entering this building should feel smaller because they need another chance. Carol wiped her eyes. Marcus nodded. Devin looked toward the floor, but I saw his shoulders relax. I spoke about Thomas Margaret Whitmore Richard's first medical device and the importance of useful work. I did not speak about forged signatures or family betrayal. That story had led me here, but it did not deserve to own the room. This building exists because life can break a plan without breaking a person, I said. You may lose a job, a marriage, a home, or someone you love. But as long as you are willing to learn, work, and begin again, your story is not finished. The applause began softly and grew until it filled the workshop. When I stepped away from the podium, Sophie hugged me. Then I saw Ethan standing near the back entrance. He had arrived alone. There was no expensive watch on his wrist, no tailored jacket. He wore dark pants, a plain button-down shirt, and the expression of a man uncertain whether he was welcome. Our eyes met. He did not walk toward me immediately. He waited until the students and guests had finished speaking with me. That mattered. When he finally approached, he stopped several feet away. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Ethan. Thank you for inviting me." I nodded. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. Then he held out a large envelope. "This contains copies of the payments I've made, my agreement with the logistics company, and the repayment schedule I arranged with my attorney." I did not take it immediately. "You did not need to bring proof today." "I know, but I wanted you to see that I'm continuing." I accepted the envelope. He looked around the workshop. "Dad would have loved this." "Yes." I used to think he kept this place because he wasn't ambitious enough to do something bigger. The honesty of that statement hurt, but I listened. "I was wrong," Ethan said. "I thought success meant having enough power that no one could look down on you. Then I became the person looking down on everyone else." His eyes filled, but he did not use his tears to ask for comfort. "I measured your worth by what I thought you could give me. When I believed you had nothing, I treated you like you were nothing." I held his gaze. "That is true." He nodded. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today." "Good. I'm not asking for money either." "That is also good." A small, sad smile passed across his face. "I only wanted to ask whether I could stay for lunch." The volunteers were setting up long tables in the training hall. The meal was open to everyone who had attended. "There is an empty seat," I said. Relief crossed his face. "Thank you, but you should understand something." "I do." "No, Ethan. Listen." He straightened. "Being allowed into the room is not the same as having your old place restored. Trust will return slowly if it returns at all. I understand. You will not be seated beside me as though nothing happened." "I don't expect to be." I pointed toward the kitchen area where volunteers were carrying food. "They could use help." Ethan rolled up his sleeves. "What should I do?" "Ask them." He walked toward the volunteers. I watched as he introduced himself to Denise Carter, who handed him a stack of plates. For the next hour, my son served food-filled water pitchers and cleared tables. He did not tell anyone who I was. He did not mention the money. He did not seek praise. During lunch, he sat between Marcus and Devin at the volunteers' table. I saw him listening while Marcus described the difficulty of beginning again after leaving the military. For once, Ethan did not interrupt with a story about himself. Allison came to stand beside me. "Do you think he has changed?" "I think he is changing." "Is that enough?" "For today." Sophie joined us carrying 3 slices of pie. She handed one to me. Grandpa would have said the pieces were too small. He would have taken 2. We laughed together. Across the room, Ethan looked toward us, but did not assume he had been invited into the moment. I lifted my hand. After a brief hesitation, he smiled. That was all I could offer then. Not complete forgiveness, not forgotten betrayal, only recognition that he had taken one honest step. As I looked around the workshop, I understood something I had failed to see before. I had never been poor. I had been grieving. I had been careful. I had lived in a modest apartment and counted the cost of groceries. But poverty was not measured by how little I spent. The real poverty in my family had been the absence of gratitude, courage, and respect. Richard Whitmore had walked through that door and revealed the value of my shares. But the money was never the most important revelation. His arrival showed me who respected me when they believed I had nothing and who became kind only after learning I had millions. Sophie had chosen me before there was any reward. Allison had begun rebuilding our relationship by accepting consequences. Ethan was learning that a place at the family table was not inherited forever. It had to be honored. That afternoon, I stood beside Thomas's workbench while students explored the classrooms around me. The building was alive again, and so was I. What Catherine learned was that a person's worth can never be measured by the size of a home, the age of address, the car they drive, or the number in a bank account. Money may change how people see us, but it should never determine whether we deserve kindness, dignity, or respect. The people who truly value us are often revealed when they believe we have nothing to offer them. Sophie protected her grandmother before she knew about the millions. Richard honored Catherine because he remembered her courage, not because he wanted her wealth. Their loyalty was sincere because it existed before there was any reward. This story also reminds us that love does not require surrendering our boundaries. Catherine loved her children, but she refused to let love become permission for manipulation, humiliation, or theft. She understood that constantly rescuing someone from the consequences of their actions does not always help them. Sometimes it only teaches them that they can continue causing harm without taking responsibility. Forgiveness is powerful, but forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not require immediate trust, unlimited access, or a return to the same unhealthy relationship. Real reconciliation begins when apologies are followed by changed behavior. Allison started rebuilding her relationship with her mother when she stopped making excuses. Ethan took his first honest step when he stopped asking for money and began accepting responsibility. Catherine's greatest victory was not receiving $28 million. It was discovering that she could protect herself without becoming cruel. Instead of using her wealth for revenge, she transformed Thomas's workshop into a place where other people could rebuild their lives. She turned betrayal into purpose, grief into service, and pain into a legacy of hope. No matter your age, it is never too late to defend your dignity. Set healthy boundaries or begin a new chapter. Living modestly does not make someone poor. The deepest poverty is living without gratitude, integrity, compassion, or respect. Do you believe Catherine was right to refuse to rescue her family's businesses? Could you forgive Ethan and Allison after what they did? Share your honest thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and join us for more stories about family courage, justice, and second chances.